Hello and good evening. I'm Mario Rosero, the Executive Director of the National Art Education Association, and welcome to our 7th NAEA Town Hall. This evening we'll focus on lessons learned from this school year and looking forward to next school year and what have we learned and what will we take forward. We have a long conversation with some very special guests whom you will meet shortly. I am thrilled to join my fellow art educators and my art education community. As a former art educator for elementary middle school and a lifelong arts administrator, it's nice to be within the community. Before we get started, we always like to take a moment to acknowledge the Native people and Native lands in each of our communities, in our homes. So if we can just take a minute to acknowledge. Thank you so much. And we usually take a minute to acknowledge everything that everyone has weathered and persevered through this past year during COVID and the pandemic. But tonight, especially in light of the George Floyd trial, what we'd like to do is just take a moment as a community and really lock arms and take a minute to send our love to George Floyd and our collective love to George Floyd's family and his community. And just take a moment of silence with me, please. These are definitely the times to lean into art and lean into your arts community. We're definitely here for each other, so we'll keep the conversation relevant, and please feel free to keep the chat active as we go through the conversation. So we created the town halls as a way to meet our members and our educators where they are, especially during this past year. And the way that we keep the town hall ethos alive is that we receive questions from members in advance, and those questions are populated throughout our conversations this evening. We'll be taking a long conversation format, and what that means is that it's not that the conversation will go on forever. It's set up as almost a conversational relay where pairs of folks will be in conversation with each other. So person A will come on as the interviewer, person B will be the interviewee. Each pairing will have 6 minutes of conversation. At minute 5, you'll hear a chime. They'll have 1 minute left to wrap up the conversation. They'll wrap up. Person A will exit. Person B becomes the interviewer. Person C comes on as the interviewee, and it goes on and so forth. It's okay if that didn't make sense, because it's all going to make sense when you experience it, and it works really well for us every time. The real goal is that we have a conversational thread that goes across multiple perspectives, so you can get a 360 view on what we're talking about. So please keep the chat very active. If you have questions, comments, we'll be responding along the way. And if there's anything we didn't cover, we'll do our best to save time at the very end to make sure that we have a few minutes for any questions or conversation that we didn't cover while we were together. Live transcript should be turned on, so you can go there to get closed captioning if you need it. And we advise that you're in speaker view for these conversations. We're also streaming on Facebook Live. And once again, we thank everyone for joining us. So without further ado, we're going to begin our first conversation. So I'm going to invite my fellow panelists to turn their videos on. Great. You can join us all as a group here as we experience this conversation together. So it's time to get started. It's a great privilege and honor to welcome our first guest. Anna Pilhofer is a friend and colleague. She is not only on NAEA's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Commission, which I've had the pleasure of working really closely with, but Anna is also an elementary teacher in Santa Barbara, California. So Anna, my friend, welcome to the conversation. It's so nice to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me, Mario. I'm so grateful to be in community with you, the panelists, and our audience here today.
So I know as a practitioner and as a state leader, you've experienced this past year on a couple of different levels, but I'd love to hear How has your school year been? And are there any innovations that have emerged from your work this year?
You know, these times that we are living in have really unleashed endless challenges and opportunities in the elementary art space. It was a year of both small and big celebrations, a lot of false starts, and while I embraced like troubleshooting things like technology glitches and trying, often failing, to coax students to speak from tiny windows on Zoom, just as we are today. But overall, I can say it was a year of tremendous growth for me. Thanks to NAEA, I've had the resource and tools to navigate this new teaching terrain. And moving forward, I am open. I am open with ideas about how we can move into next school year. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. And I'm looking to just place myself in a better position to educate my students in what we can think of as our new normal when we return.
Well, I for one really appreciate your optimism. We know there's been even for veteran teachers, there's been a great deal of learning this year, and I know some colleagues I speak to have been teaching 15 or more years and feel like it's year one because we're creating all new strategies and figuring out ways to do demonstrations through video and through virtual. So I appreciate your optimism there. We're going to dive into one of our first questions from one of our attendees. So Carrie from Ohio asks, virtual learning highlighted many inequities across school districts. How can we better use virtual platforms to bridge that gap?
So this is a great question, Carrie. And despite kind of this global emergency that we're in, um, access to technologies in ways that we never thought were possible are possible now. So it almost felt like within a flip of a switch, we automatically had devices in students' hands. And we were using platforms that we never imagined as art teachers we would use. So as we're kind of thrown into this distance learning with little preparation, we jumped right in. We navigated an abundance of free resources and apps, and all through community. So if I can't emphasize enough how to collaborate, is to really access the resources who are ourselves. I cannot tell you how often I went to social media or even my colleagues at NAEA to really get excited about new materials and access to technology that would drive students' learning and engagement. But the one critical piece that was missing was that personal connection with me, their teacher. So for students in our classroom who their teacher is everything really, even the most engaging projects and animated emojis were nothing compared to the human connection we have with our students, especially now in the turmoil that we're living in, that focusing on student well-being is of the utmost priority. Since I work in a district that provides one-to-one technology, I feel like I'm really 3 steps ahead. It wasn't just enough to try to take in as much professional learning as I could, but just to get in and get dirty and to do the work, because this new environment is not always easily facilitated in an art classroom. So with that, I think there's just so much more opportunity as we're thinking about even the lives that our students are living. Culturally responsive teaching is really something that I think students need in this environment. I've viewed this crisis as a time and space to really experiment, and not so much experiment, to really unearth what students are feeling, to process, but also to liberate them, to give them empowerment to move forward. And lastly, I've never connected with families in the way that I have online. So literally teaching and seeing parents hip to hip with their students has been really a beautiful thing for me to experience. And it's something that I'm hopeful that I can take forward into next school year.
I really appreciate that, Anna. So I heard some threads of social emotional learning in there. And I appreciate that you talked about cultural responsive teaching and pedagogy. We know that oftentimes folks will confront different terminology. So sometimes it's culturally sustaining, culturally responsive, and they're very related. I wonder if you might just like conversationally just kind of define or unpack what that means for you, because I think it's really helpful for our members to hear different perspectives on that.
So culturally responsive is really being responsive to your community. I mean, really knowing the students that you have in front of them, in front of you, and understanding how you can really robustly expand their horizons in terms of their cultural knowing. So that knowledge, or that those sets of assets that our families and students bring, are priceless. Culturally sustaining, on the other hand, is really taking their culture and really building upon it, and understanding that there is a wealth of knowledge there that exists. We're just really there to facilitate them really opening up to who they are through the curriculum.
Absolutely. It's I always took I tried to take a student-centered approach, right? To really honor their voices and their stories, and as they walk through the threshold of my classroom door, to really understand who they were. And I feel like that what you just said just takes it so much further, right? And it's just like really honoring that narrative. So I thank you for just talking through that a little bit. So we had another question that's connected, I think, to this. Cindy from New York is curious, if virtual options are here to stay, how can we ensure equity without diminishing opportunities for on-site students?
This is such a great question, because we often think that this is a temporary situation for us art teachers, that we do have this kind of emergency teaching that we've been doing. But I think for me, or speaking from me, I found that technology has only expanded what I know and how I can teach within the classroom. So this really kind of creates a new normal for us and amplifies kind of the desperate need for our systems to kind of radically be reimagined. And I can't say it enough, is that we can't continue addressing kind of the basic human needs of our students and families, but we need to do some of that restoration through arts learning. So part of that human connection and human need we can build within our classroom, whether it be on Zoom or within the physical classrooms that we have in our school sites. Likewise, children with limited learning supports at home have almost no means to support their education. And that means we really have to think outside of the normal realms of school. I know there was oftentimes that I was teaching on off hours, and I know that healthy boundaries are something that's important. However, if I needed to get to a student or a family, and that was just meeting with them on a weekend or after hours, I was willing to take that extra step just to make a connection. So having this range and plenitude of tools now, I can't imagine how we couldn't accelerate learning in the arts without it. And opening our minds, I think, if anything, it's given us this resiliency as teachers, especially art teachers, to focus on taking note of how long projects take. I was doing the math earlier and realized that I was able to teach so many more lessons on Zoom than I would in a physical classroom. And with that, you get iterations of
Mhm.
lessons. So I have found it as an experimental ground for just exploring lessons. Excuse me, that's my dog.
That's great.
Um,
Sorry about it.
and just building empathy. I think, if anything, it's built empathy within me and my students to co-navigate this world. But also, even more so, is how they can take their lived experiences and focus that in on their lessons themselves.
Well, I love this, the notion of resiliency, and art educators, art teachers, to think that we could become even more resilient, because I don't know that I know a group that could be more resilient than an art teacher even before pandemic. But this like um, endless adaptability. Maybe it's not always for the greatest reasons, but out of that we have certainly built a really strong muscle in this area. And I know that art teachers can be adaptable and very resilient, and I think that's something that we could actually use as a platform for even greater growth, but also greater impact. And I appreciate this piece about co-navigating with our students, right? Co-constructing that knowledge and that education. So I'm sad that our time between the two of us is just about up, but I do have one more question that we always like to end these pairings with, which is, what are your tips for self-care right now?
So self-care is vital to our well-being, especially in these times. I think just for ourselves and for those around us, especially, we have to be present and grounded within ourselves to be the teachers that we need to be for our students. So one things that I used to find indulgent became essential to my health and equilibrium, really. So that mindset has really taken me into this school year and even going into next. So I have been giving myself permission to read a book merely for pleasure, to make home cooked meals with my family, and just tinkering around in my tiny backyard garden in Santa Barbara, California has been really a really enriching thing.
There's been some joy in the everyday, right? Just some
Mhm.
of those mundane tasks actually become really special. I know I've found some similar joy in cooking and just, sitting with my cat, right? It's just like taking the time to just be a regular person actually has a lot of value right now. So, well, Anna, I really appreciate connecting with you. Thank you so much for the conversation, and I'll let you move on to the next. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. So I have the extreme pleasure of introducing a incredible art educator. I'd like to welcome James Wells to the conversation. He is the Innovative Teaching and Learning Manager for Crayola in Cordova, Tennessee. So please help me in join me in welcoming James. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Anna. So good to be here.
I'm so glad to be with you and have this opportunity to connect. We have some wonderful questions lined up, and I am excited to hear your responses. So, from Janice in Tennessee, what procedures and lessons do you think will carry over to quote unquote regular classrooms without COVID restrictions?
Yes, great question, Janice. Thank you so much for that. Um, as I think about this question more and build on the response that you provided as it relates to technology and such, understanding that having been a former middle school art educator, the time in the art room is very finite. And one of the things that I've noticed with technology is it allows uh, opportunities for educators to uh, lessen the amount of times you have to repeat things. So flipped classroom is one example where you can record a particular part of instruction. And for students who may show up late to the regular classroom or who may have missed, you can use flipped technology to as an instructional tool to meet the needs of those students. So I definitely see that as a time saver, if you will, when we think about the art classroom, when we get back to normal or the new normal, if you will. So I definitely see that. I also see a lot of apps that can pull in student portfolios. So I definitely see that as another opportunity for teachers to be able to track students' progress over the course of the year. So not, your traditional having the work of art in hand, allowing students to take pictures, taking ownership of the images that are being captured in the classroom and leveraging that as a way to track student progress, and also being able to share that in real time with parents. All right, so I see that as a tool. And then going back to the flipped classroom, when we think about the current art standards, create, present, respond, connect, the flipped classroom creates an opportunity for students to present their work, and they can do this at home on their own time. So Flipgrid is definitely a resource that I would suggest one use and leverage in this case. So these are a few examples that I see that will seamlessly transition to a quote unquote regular classroom environment.
Thank you for that response. And I think the threads that I see, running through that conversation or that response was having choice, voice, but flexibility for ways in which students can access their learning. So flipped learning is definitely something that I want to know more about and have been writing copious notes. So I'd want to connect with you more on that.
Absolutely.
Um, and in looking ahead, We have another question from Miriam from Virginia, and she asks you, seeing as creativity in the job force is of high demand, how can we as art teachers help?
Great question, Miriam. Daniel Pink tells us that creativity is the currency of the future. So it is our responsibility as educators to prepare students for their future and not our past. So in understanding that, the greatest example is, or at least the silver lining in this pandemic, is there has been quite a bit of innovation that has surfaced as a result of the pandemic. And one of the things that we can all connect to is masks, right? We have seen variations, artistic expressions of mask. And one example is someone that I met. He and I went to high school together, or through our high school formative years together here in Memphis, Tennessee, and met along the way. His name is Patrick Henry. He has the Henry mask. I don't know if you've seen that, but his masks were inspired by origami, right? So thinking about real world connections, right? Where students could create something that solves a problem, right? Because we know that creativity is all about problem solving, as well as many other things. But understanding, when we think about the pandemic and the coronavirus, how can we protect people in a way where they can not receive the virus, right? So the 6 feet, the mask making, right? So have students create a mask even, right? That is real world connected. And I think that could be a great example. And again, that's our responsibility as educators to, create opportunities for students to have those real world experiences. So I think that doing that is important. Also inviting community businesses in, right? There are a lot of problems that they're looking to solve. And as a former teacher, students are full of ideas. I know that, and you know that. So allowing students to maybe go through a problem solving process with local businesses and business leaders to get their insights, whether it's on parks, right, where students like to have fun and hang out, or a local sports complex, have students create sketches, or a skate park, like inspire students, create opportunities for them to make real world happenings right there in their community. And I think you'll be well on your way. So again, Miriam, thank you for that very good question.
Thank you, James. I love that connection to 21st century skills. And these are all things that carry us over into the creative workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So giving students opportunities to kind of explore those things is really impactful, and can help us in these social situations. And this upheaval that we're now is having response and empowering students is so important. So thank you for that. So many folks have questions about strategies for managing supplies, materials, and equipment. Rebecca from Virginia asks, what is the best way to get students who are remote their supplies? What are your tips, James?
Another great question. Thank you for that. So I mentioned I'm here in Tennessee. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. And one of the things that my local district here has done in terms of getting students supplies. So we have meal distribution sites, and students are able to not only pick up their meals, but in many cases, they're able to pick up their supplies for school. So I would suggest one, maybe partnering with your larger district's meal distribution plan. And if that's not the case, look into your local community. So your YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs and such, and creating opportunities for students to pick up supplies in those local areas, as well as having designated times for parents to pick up supplies for their students. Great question.
Thank you, James. I am a parent who appreciates picking two things at one time. So I really can imagine that being a huge resource to our families. So our time is done together, but I pass the mic on to you, so you can introduce our next guest. Thank you, James.
You're so welcome. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Karen Rosner, Director of Visual Arts for the New York City Department of Education. Hi, Karen, great to see you and welcome to the conversation. Karen, are you there? I think you may be on mute.
How's that?
That is perfect, Karen. Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. And I am, first of all, I have to say to Anna and to James that I am so glad that this is being recorded, because I need to just play back and learn from so many of the things that you shared with everyone. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a question from a colleague, Lori, that has a great question here. Do you think asynchronous online curriculum will be retained by schools as an affordable option / alternative for arts programming?
So, Lori, I think a lot of people have been considering your question about asynchronous, and also I would say synchronous learning. I would have to begin by saying that asynchronous learning can never really be an alternative for arts programming, but certainly an enhancement. And I think everyone can agree with this, but all of the teachers that I've worked with, and I'm sure across the country, have spent endless hours learning and gathering so much information. And you can certainly hear that. Anna's a wonderful representative of that, of all of the, we've all stepped up and learned so much and gained so much knowledge in technology. We've created and archived countless demos. My friend Craig, a wonderful teacher in Manhattan, has developed these phenomenal iMovies. So all of these things that have been created by you, and by the teachers all across the country, certainly should be used and taken advantage of. Families came up in both of the conversations with James and Anna. And there's a role for asynchronous learning with families, because teachers can share what they've done, and that can be follow-up at home, especially with our youngest students. So that certainly is an important thing. I want to give a shout out also to our museums who have created, and I'm sure again, this is across the country, have created wonderful resources. They have really stepped up, and there's a lot of asynchronous resources available, again, to use in the classroom as enhancement, not taking the place of true arts programming, of course. In our office, I know I've partnered, we have great partners with Studio in the School, and through a grant, we have developed remote resources, and they are asynchronous. People are definitely using them this year. When we finish the whole round, there'll be about 40 of them, but people will be using them next year. And we are encouraging them again to use them to enhance the classroom. So definitely there is a place for that. And I do want to mention synchronous, just to share with you that I had the opportunity to watch a Zoom observation lesson with Hanan, who is a fantastic film educator in Manhattan in high school. And the give and take that he did with his students and the use of Zoom was done so artfully that I think there is a role moving ahead for that synchronous learning as well.
Awesome. Great example. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, what I'm hearing is this is to support, not to supplant art instruction, right?
Exactly.
And I love how you are empowering your teachers. So shout out to Craig, I think you mentioned, for creating the iMovies to support this work. So we have another question from Margaret in New York, and she's wondering, any thoughts about the value of virtual field trips or the possibility of returning to museums for field trips next year?
Margaret, thank you so much for that. Museums are my passion. And I'm going to start by getting on a little soapbox before I go into virtual and actual visits. As educators, as art educators, we all love going into museums, and we all get such joy out of spending time in museums. We want to be able to give that to our students as well. We know that moving ahead, not every one of our students will become great artists or have careers in the arts, but to be able to give them the gift of walking into a museum and feeling really comfortable, like they belong in a museum, that's the greatest gift, and that's for a lifetime. So that being said, there definitely is a place for virtual museum tours. And I will say that if you go onto various websites, you'll find there are many, again, museums stepping up, creating great virtual field trips, and some of them are customized. So you can speak with museum educators and have them customize a tour for your class. Even in the before times, before the pandemic, we know that teachers have had difficulty taking classes on trips to museums for a variety of reasons. And having virtual field trips, of course, is a wonderful enhancement to the classroom. It's also a stepping stone. So just starting early with virtual field trips and using that as a way of scaffolding, and then eventually being able to take students on class trips. I also wanted to mention that through the museums, we are able to expose, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we're able to expose our students to such a diversity across the world and through time. It's also a great way for our students to connect their own work to work that they see in a museum and feel that they're part of a continuum. The other part of this is we're so interested not only in the idea of diversity, but in the idea of our students seeing themselves in the works of art that are shown, and what better way than in a museum. I think of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. She is an educator, and she wrote an article that you may be familiar with. If not, I urge you to read it. And it's called Mirrors and Windows and Sliding Glass Doors. And it's all about kids' literature. And is there enough out there for students to see themselves in the characters? And we've used that with our visual arts teachers and made that connection. Are you showing works of art to your students that also mirror what they are? So yes, yes, yes to virtual tours and to actual tours.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And we have a little less than a minute, and I want to get this question in
Sure.
from Katie here. How can educators better prepare our pre-service teachers to deal with the emotional weight of real world problems? And what an appropriate question right now.
Absolutely. And it certainly is at this time and what's happened today. So I will make this very brief, and it's really a very short answer. And that to me is to talk, is to connect. We need the professors in our colleges to think about culturally responsive education and social emotional learning with their students, our future teachers. And they need to have open dialogue. They need to encourage people to talk and communicate. And when our teachers, our pre-service teachers, go forth, we need for them to feel that the importance of connecting and constantly talking about the issues of the day and not feeling isolated.
Wow, Karen, thank you so much for your knowledge. I'm going to take that away. Connections before content. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time. And I'm going to pass it over to you so you can interview our next panelist.
Okay. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ray Yang, visual arts teacher, and grade level dean, University Prep from Seattle, Washington. Ray, thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to hearing your responses to these questions.
Thanks so much for having me on here, Karen.
Sure. So from Alice in New York, how will mental health for both students and educators be addressed as part of curricula moving forward?
Alice, thanks so much for that question. And I think just like the last question you fielded, Karen, like this is a really timely and very pertinent question, because we know that in the last year with the pandemic that mental health, there's been a toll on mental health, not just for students, but for teachers, right? The amount of work people have taken on, the disconnect, the lack of social interaction, it's all a lot. And on top of that, just what's happening in our world right now. We're talking about, on top of the pandemic, a lot of race and class struggle, highlighted by the George Floyd decision today, right? And so I think it's so important to do a few things. I think that knowing and acknowledging what's happening is important, right? So that we don't just brush it under the rug or sweep it under the rug and like not acknowledge it. We have to be able to talk about difficult things, um, and that just acknowledging it makes it real, and it's important for the mental health of both teachers and for students. Being able to have those conversations, we talked about conversations sums with our students, is a way to help them just find some release, because they might be carrying a lot. We know they might be bringing a lot into the classrooms, especially in some schools where, you know, depending on the population, like kids might be dealing with very real world things that they walk into the classroom or come onto Zoom or might not be able to be on Zoom, right? We know that like when they're not on camera, there's this desire to always have them there so you can see them, but there might be really good reasons why they're not able to be on. So that all has to do with their mental health. We've done a lot of social emotional learning work at my school, and that's you know, SEL work that's been incorporated into both the classroom, but additionally through, we have advisories and things like that. And so it's a space where we're able to acknowledge some of those issues and talk about that. Again, right, there's so much happening. Like for me, I know I come to school and I carry a lot. Today with the decision, I was thinking about it. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed, updating to try to see what happened. In the last month or so, like I've had a lot of struggle with a lot of the anti-Asian hate that I've, you know, seen chronicled. There's been a lot of anti-trans legislation that's been coming through in governments. And so like those things all weigh on me. I know they weigh on students. And so again, having conversations and being able to address them and being able to then think about how you can incorporate them into your curriculum. How can you give students some voice to be able to express and talk about that? An organization that does awesome work is the Amplifier Project. They are based out of Seattle, but they do a lot of these fabulous posters and images, and they're also community sourced and community based, where they're encouraging artists and activists to submit artwork and publishing these posters, which people have probably seen all around their cities, or, you know, they're distributed really widely. And so it's important to acknowledge it, but then also provide ways that we can give voice, and the arts are an amazing way, we all know, to do that kind of work.
Thank you so much, and also for sharing that personal note, and also pointing out how important it is for us to stay current, not just by hearing a news, you know, clip here and there, but really diving into things and being very current so we can really address these issues with our students. I have another question. This is from Martha from Illinois. What were the best ways that teachers got to know their students in the virtual setting?
Martha, again, another excellent question. It's tough, right? Because we think that like visual art especially is a really difficult thing to not teach in person, right? To not have that like kind of instant rapport, or be able to look over, you know, a student's shoulder and offer feedback to work. And so I think there are lots of different strategies and lots of different ways. Some of the things I like doing is I've had students do a little bit more writing and reflecting. And so like that helps me get to know them a little bit more quickly. And you know, I get lots of like pushback from kids because they say, Ray, this is not English class. This is art class. I came in here to draw, and, you know, talk about like how artists have to be able to articulate ideas and be able to share what they're doing. So like writing and reflecting is really great. I've been trying to use different tools like Padlet. I've been using the Google Drive suite, Google Slides, things like that. We actually did a virtual exhibition with like a series of Google Slides that ran through, and there are actually some awesome free templates and things out there that you can use to like kind of have like a museum kind of appearance to a Google slide, and you can just share that and run it through something like Zoom, or and so like using some of those resources to help just like connect with students, and then getting to know them, being a little creative. We use Zoom at my school for teaching, and so I use a lot of breakout rooms just to like be able to check in with them, for them to be able to connect with each other, but for me to hear a little bit more about their experiences and what they're doing. And then I think most importantly is the idea of meeting the students where they're at, accessing and connecting with them through their interests. Something I've done a lot of is shorter projects, really quick things that like, and really giving them a lot of space to like decide on what they want to draw or work on or create. And it helps me get to know them a little bit and helps me to be able to develop that connection quicker. Because, I've had to find all the different tools that I can to be able to like connect with them a little more.
Thank you. This was such a great question, and I so enjoyed hearing those responses. They were wonderful. And our next question is from Allison from Indiana. How do you think the pandemic has changed our lessons/projects in the years moving forward?
Wow, Allison, it's interesting because I was thinking about this, and I had a couple different responses, and actually the first thing I think about is that our teachers have always been the most flexible educators I know. Like they've always been the ones who've been like, able to like turn on a dime in a different way, because in a lot of ways we've had to, right? There's almost like a kind of survival component to that in our schools. But, and so like, how has it changed? I don't know, it's changed a lot. I think we're going to have to continue to be flexible and continue to be like really like fluid with how we're approaching things. I think incorporating more technology into some of what we're doing is going to be an important element. I do more digital drawing now. I'm lucky enough to be at a school where we do have some access to iPads. And so working with students who are actually really excited to do that helps to create and incorporate that into what I'm doing in the classroom. And then lastly, and I'm going to wrap up real quick, breaking it back down to the bare bones. What are we trying to teach? Because I think sometimes we can get caught up in the bells and whistles, but like remembering the elements of the arts are some of the basic concepts we want, and like how are the projects I'm doing really addressing that, and how am I also creating space for students to take risks and explore a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much. It was really great to connect with you and hear your responses. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Karen. And thanks for all those great questions too. So I'm actually going to have the opportunity now to invite Mario back in and be able to have a little conversation with him. And Mario, this is a great conversation so far, right?
Hi, Ray. Yeah, absolutely. I was so like lost in listening to everybody and taking copious notes that I'm like, oh wait, it's time for me to jump back into the conversation here. But really great ideas that I think folks can put into action, but also things that are helping us to think. There are some things that have evolved from this moment in time that we can definitely take forward. So.
Mario, I know you are a great synthesizer. You sum things up really well, and you also are always on that big picture. And so we have a question from Shauna in Alaska asking, what does next year look like? What do we take with us? What do we leave behind?
I'll keep my answer pretty simple and straightforward, and I think this echoes the words of this group, which is, I think there's greater connection, right? There's a value for really connecting with each other as people, and really spending time listening and listening towards understanding, right? Like making space, holding space to really hear, listen, and understand a child's perspective and what they're trying to communicate, what they're trying to understand about the world. And I think art is, we have such great tools to, allow that voice, allow those ideas out. And so I think, making space for that connection is going to be one of the most important things, especially because we have new tools, but we're also so hungry for, hopefully, knock on wood, things continue to improve and we are able to gather more in person. And if, the classroom resumes, whether it's virtual or in person, that we can use some of these tools that we've gained to really build more community. Because I think that we need that. And I hear it again and again. The art room is historically and still very strong as a safe space for young people to be themselves. And I think a big part of that is the value of critique that happens in the art room, where we have learned how to express opinions that might be differing, but we can hold them all in one space. And you're not my enemy because you have a different opinion. You actually are my ally because you're making me stronger. And I think there's something really special about that.
Those are great points, Mario. Thanks so much. Yeah, community within art spaces is huge, and I love how like like art spaces really often do become a place where like kids from all different parts of the school like come together and are just there to like work and create. Mario, overall, what are you hearing as trends and takeaways from this conversation again, right? Like coming back to that like synthesizing and pulling, what have you heard? What's kind of struck you?
Yep. So I'm going to go to my notes here. So so these are all things that I think are happening in the moment, but they're also great lessons to take forward. So this whole notion of just, continuing to engage with parents and families, and maybe even deepening that engagement in those relationships. I mean, I am not saying it's easy to be in, if you have a student body of 400 students, to be in 400 homes, every week must be a bit exhausting, but also what a unique opportunity for parents to get insight into the arts room and the value of arts learning. So I think continuing to deepen parent and family relationships. I love this idea of art teacher resiliency as, wearing it as sort of a badge of honor, right? It is a strength that we have, no matter the reason behind it. It is a strength that we bring to our school communities that I think we can really lean into and really capitalize on. This idea of empowering students and co-constructing learning with our students, amplifying their voice, making space for their voices. You said this: acknowledge the world around us, right? We're not, I don't know that there was ever a day we could shut the door and ignore what was outside, but it is certainly not today. And we, our classrooms are porous, and there is space. The arts respond to what's going on in the world around us. So we need to make sure that our rooms are doing that too. And then, I think there's this great idea of restoration through arts learning. I know one of you said that this evening, and I love that idea that we can also not just get things out, but also utilize art to help to heal and to restore us. So look, that's just from 1 hour conversation. Those are some pretty amazing takeaways. So I thank each of you for sharing your great expertise and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Any advice for art educators moving forward?
Look, you're not alone. Lean on each other, right? Whether it's if you don't have that ally, find that ally in your school community. Of course, NAEA is here for you, but it just makes such a difference to have at least one teacher colleague that you can really lean on and strategize with and problem solve with and vent to. So just make sure you have at least that one person, because I think it just makes such a difference, especially in a year like this.
Thanks so much, Mario. And we do have a question. If you've got any tips on self-care, I think that's huge right now. And like, right, we still do need to like think about like how are we kind of sustaining ourselves? Any tips for the audience?
Absolutely. So I realized that our conversation has moved along so fast that we didn't all get to answer this question. So I wonder, James and Karen and Ray, I don't think you got to answer this either. Can we maybe just popcorn and just like maybe 3 bullets? What are our tips for self-care? And we'll just kind of go in order: James, Karen, Ray, then I'll do myself, because I think it's really valuable to hear about how, everyone needs to take care of themselves better right now. So James, what do you got?
Yes, for me, recognizing that there is a lot of noise, and it seems in this technology space, the downtime is becoming a thing of the past. So I wake up extra early in the morning before I have to do any specific task, to take that time for me to sit and rest in the silence, to listen to nature, to meditate, read scripture, read books, whatever it is, it's important to take time for you. So for me, that's the tip. And if waking up early is your thing, I invite you to do it.
Great. Thanks, James. Karen?
Well, for me, it's museums, it's spending like a solid hour or so in a museum, just taking notes. It's doing crossword puzzles. And also, I have to say, it's connecting when I can really connect teachers one-on-one. It's such a pleasure, and I just find that very enjoyable. So yeah, that's it.
Love that. And Ray?
Getting outside, right? Getting off a screen. It's important, right? Just not to be like staring at that little box. And you know, some of the other tips that folks mentioned, I definitely do too. But one of the really concrete things I try to do is when end of the day or on the weekend, I close Zoom. I don't let it be on my computer or whatever other things. I try to close whatever you know, boxes, panels, windows that I can. And there's something about like closing it off and putting it away that helps me disconnect a little bit.
Good job. I think that's good advice for all of us. Our conversation has already come into a close. I hope that our audience will join me in a thunderous virtual round of applause and thanks to Anna, James, Karen, and Ray for giving their time and sharing their expertise with us tonight and their wisdom. So thanks to each of you for joining us. This is such a rich conversation. This is recorded. It'll be available on our NAEA website. So thank you again. I want to thank, we're not quite done yet, but I want to thank everybody for joining and also acknowledge and thank NAEA board members and board elects that have joined us for these conversations. And before we wrap up, I have just a few things to share. So we're going to transition to a few slides. It's going to magically happen, I promise. Well, I'm going to start talking regardless.
Just one moment. Sorry.
You're great. So we always like to preview some things that are upcoming and some tools that are available to you. So one of the things is that after every town hall, immediately there is a one-page front and back handout that is immediately available that is a download of our 4 experts thinking right now. So they've responded to questions that are relevant to this topic, as well as tips for self-care. So that tool is immediately available to everybody. So we're really thrilled that we can offer that to everyone. You can find it on the town hall webpage of the NAEA website. There we go. Look, I'm gonna vamp regardless of the slides. Here we go. So there's an image of that beautiful handout. So you can take this even further. So we like to provide you with immediate tools. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Our upcoming webcast. Oh, nope, we're on to our arts or education. Wow, Dennis and I are doing a dance here. Arts, this is how it goes, guys. You know, the virtual life. Arts or Education is a campaign among all of the art form associations are really getting behind this to help provide an advocacy platform where you can create letters and documents that support the arts that can go to your school families, your school board, to really pass a resolution, but also reach out to legislators and elected officials. So there's a lot of great tools. Please visit that website at the bottom of the screen there. Thank you very much. Now, Dennis. There we go. An upcoming Need to Know webcast on Thursday, April 29th. This is with Davis in partnership, Creating Diversity Through Character Development. This great graphic novel illustrator. We're really excited about his work. That you can see the QR code here you can scan. And we had a very successful, our first ever virtual convention with over 4,600 folks attending and over 500 workshops. We thank our vibrant community for contributing to this. Everything that was recorded, almost 500 things were recorded, are available to you for the next 6 months until August 31st. So if you registered, you have access already. And if you'd like to have access, you can scan the QR code or go to our website, and $99 you have access to everything. So please consider that. It's more professional development than you could ever need in a lifetime, to be honest. And we have an upcoming webinar Wednesday, May 12th, 7 to 8 p.m. This is exploring the standards for secondary, creating, presenting, responding, and connecting. So looking at that secondary curriculum for our high school colleagues. Okay, we're getting there. Look, I emphasize this a lot, but I found community in NAEA and also a path to leadership for my early career. So I always like to extend the personal invitation to anyone who is not a member of NAEA. Please consider joining, because this community is one that you can lean on, you can connect with, you can brainstorm with. And, you know, look, all of us are great colleagues that were on this call and this conversation this evening. So please consider joining us as a member. I guarantee you'll get more member benefits than you can actually imagine. And we have an upcoming town hall. We're scheduled for May 18th. We're going to look at art educators and teacher leadership. We're really excited about this conversation, something I'm personally committed to. And then we thought we would end the school year with the art educator as artist, and really starting to make sure we're paying attention to the artists within all of us. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you got great ideas to take forward, and we will see you at the next town hall. Be well. Nice job, everyone. Thank you so much for making time. Really good stuff. Everyone's feeling good? You can talk. It's okay. People are, you know, the outtakes are the best part. I told you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Mario.
Of course.
Thank you. Loved it. Thanks for this opportunity, Mario.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part is to bring folks together who may not have known each other or may not typically get to work together, because that's, you know, that's part of the fun of my job, is that I get to meet all these great folks who I can sort of puzzle piece together into the right configuration so that we get, you know, a lot of perspectives. So I know our members really love that.
And
James,
I
what's
just
this
can't
work we got
believe.
behind you today? I always ask about your artwork. Sorry, Karen.
Oh, I was going to say, I can't believe after all this time that somebody had to say to me, "You're on mute."
Look, it happens. It happens to Dennis every day.
Sorry.
I have to pick on him. It always
Every
happens.
day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Not that it ever happens to me. I just pick on him. It happens to him.
Mario, thanks so much for this opportunity. It's awesome.
Of course, right. James, come on. You're going to jump in there.
Yeah, well, you were asking about this image here. This is my daughter, who is has a big wide smile on her face. She's so excited about today and the work today. Her birthday is actually on Friday.
Oh, wow.
Oh, happy birthday
so
to
this
her.
is-
Happy
yeah.
birthday.
Love it.
I love that. We expect to see some of your work up there at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ray, I'm surprised I'm surprised the kids didn't get something in your background as well.
Did you see my door pop a little bit?
No. Did you see my light fall off my computer?
I heard the creak, and then
I heard my dog.
Mario knows my family, and so like Eloise, I think, was starting to open it, and I just gave a little like,
Yeah, right.
like shove it back, and then kept going.
I think
Look,
we're
I
all
think
used to those moments,
Yeah.
you know?
I think it just humanizes everyone, right?
It does. It
That's the
does.
best part. That is the best part.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I won't keep you any longer, but once again, thank you so much. And we'll make sure we send you the recording and I think the link for the download is already available, but I'll send that to you as well.
That's wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you. Beautiful.
friends.
Thank
Love you
you.
all.
Take
It's great
care.
being
Have a good night. Thank
Great
you.
working with all of you. Thank you again. Take care all.
All right. Bye-bye.
To work
Bye.
with